So welcome everybody. We're just going to wait another few moments for more attendees to enter into the webinar, and then we'll get started. All right. I think we'll get started officially. So welcome everybody officially. My name is Carrie and I am part of the programming team at the Westport Library. And I'd like to welcome you all tonight to our event with Sonia Huber. Hi, Sonia. You can just wave until you're muted. To celebrate the release of her new memoir, Supremely Tiny Acts, Memoir of a Day. We are affectionately referring to this event as Supremely Huber. That's all you need to say. So just to give you a brief background on Sonia, Sonia is the author of 6 books, including the award-winning essay collection on chronic pain, Pain Woman Takes Your Keys. Her other books include Open Nobody, Cover Me, a health insurance memoir, and the Backwards Research Guide for Writers. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Brevity, Creative Fiction, Nonfiction, and other outlets. She teaches at Fairfield University and in the Fairfield Low Residency MFA program. And we are also pleased tonight to welcome Julia Lee Barclay Martin, who will be in conversation with Sonia. Hello, Julia, welcome. Julia is an award-winning writer and theater director, produced and published internationally. She founded Apocryphal Theatre in London and was awarded a Practice as Research PhD by Northampton in the UK and a BA from Wesleyan University. She lives in New York City and she is finalizing a book while coaching and teaching writers. So we are very happy to have Julia here as well in conversation with Sonia. Just a quick note before I turn the conversation over to Julia, I'm going to post in the chat a link if you'd like to buy Sonia's book, which comes out officially on Saturday. It will be signed and you can either pick that up at the library or we can ship that to you. And also if you have any questions throughout the evening, feel free to put the questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So I think that's it for all our housekeeping. So Julia, I'm going to officially turn it over to you and welcome you both again. And I'll see you at the end for a little close. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Carrie. I was honored to be asked to be in conversation with Sonia, whose writing I love and this book I love. And a lot of the way she teaches, I also love. We'll talk about that later. But I know that she is going to happily read some of the opening pages from Supremely Tiny Acts, which will probably answer a lot of the questions. Well, I know answers a lot of the questions about what inspired the book in the first place. So before we talk, I want to hand it over to Sonia.
All right, thank you so much, Julia, and thanks folks for tuning in on Zoom. It's nice to be with all of you virtually. So this is the book, Supremely Tiny Acts, which is from Mad Creek Books at Ohio State University Press. Go Buckeyes. As you might or might not have seen, this is a book about that circles around an act of civil disobedience where I was arrested during a climate protest in fall 2019. And the container of the day that the book is about is the day that I had to go to court after the civil disobedience charge in the morning, and then had to get my son to the DMV for his driver's permit test in the afternoon because I am bad at calendars and schedules. So I made that day for myself. Anyway, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and read the first 5 pages or so. I slept like shit, a feeling like chewing on tinfoil, sleep a thin, battered substance. I knew the whole night that I had to get up early, and I absolutely had to go down to the city for court. And now I'm nervous about it, nervous about how I've wedged this day together in a nonsensical stack of hours. The Fitbit vibrates on my wrist, a concession to many years of waking to a jazzy 5-note iPhone riff. Now, when I hear that ringtone, cortisol soaks me in a car wash of images. White Venetian blinds, Georgia heat, wake up to get the kid to daycare. The sound brings me back to a time when I was a divorcing, then divorced single mom being slowly forced out of a tenure track job because I'd been too mouthy about what they were doing to non-tenured people. That was then. This is now, and I'm in Connecticut. I double tap on the black rectangular face of the Fitbit. I say to my body, I'm not going to jail. My body will not be talked down and has already achieved liftoff. I take deep breaths, but then fuck up the rhythm and feel worse. Better to just leave my lungs alone and not micromanage. I told students never to start a story with someone waking up in bed, but here I go, and I'm not even a cockroach. I take out my earplugs, putty-colored foam nubs like the heads of little bald men. I'm going to court today, November 19th, 2019, because I was arrested on October 10th in a civil disobedience action in Times Square in New York, organized by the group Extinction Rebellion, to protest government inaction on climate change. A neon green boat was hauled into the center of the intersection, and then people chained and glued themselves to it. And other people sat on the asphalt in a circle around the boat holding signs. And it lasted for a time span that felt like forever, but I think was only half an hour, followed by an hour of being handcuffed that also felt like forever, and then 10 hours in jail. Extinction Rebellion started in London in 2018. The group did a lot of boat actions and took over bridges, but they did it with papier-mâché octopuses and fish costumes. And the demonstrations were so huge and playful and family-friendly, had interesting visuals, yet were saying things that were true and clear and serious about the threat facing us. I first saw those actions on Twitter as XR spread to chapters all over the world. And then I researched XR and signed up for information. And then I saw the call for participation in the action. I'd wanted to get arrested for some of the protests against the immigration abuses at the border and was on a mailing list here in Connecticut for people battling court and ICE detention. But then I couldn't make the timing work with those trainings, though I would eventually get trained to do court accompaniment. But I knew I was going to be arrested for something. I had to, because Trump's America was like living in an avalanche. And though I know it's bad to throw around facile comparisons to Hitler's Germany, I'd been soaking in reading and thinking about my German relatives for decades. The question of how and at what point to be ready to throw my body somewhere where it might make a difference. As a German American watching the dovetailing of chaos and racism and xenophobia and closing borders and corruption and abuse. There was no rescue in the fantasy of a return to normal, no after or reset button, no healing or past greatness. And this country would have to be forged into something new because hate had spread in a viral replication for so long. I knew that my privilege allowed me to get arrested and survive such a confrontation. And that privilege also obligated me to act because of the protections it afforded me. I finally felt like I had my head above water enough to manage this. I'd never been arrested, though I'd planned for it once during the first Gulf War with legal support from some Quakers. I had a bunch of other opportunities, but I didn't really understand how things worked. I didn't get that if there was a demo, there was usually legal support with bail money. I'd always opted out at the last minute because of vague fears about the money, which I didn't have. And I couldn't ask my Midwestern parents to rescue me when at the time they didn't support or were confused by what I was doing. So this morning, the whole mobilization to get to court is worse than rushing to make an international flight. And I've been kind of weepy for a week, crying in my writing group, crying in the car. This fall semester has been a little over the top, with a trip out to Illinois for Dad's emergency open heart surgery in September. Add getting arrested into a semester, well, I'm often overly optimistic or just clueless about what might be too much. I cram whatever fits into the boxes of the calendar. And today I've got to make it back home after court in New York to take my son Ivan to get his driver's permit at 2 p.m. in Connecticut. So clearly I've scheduled things badly. I find my glasses and get up in the dark. already imagining various calamities that might stop me from getting down to the physical courthouse in New York, because I'm a worst case scenario kind of woman. I go out into the dining room to take my purple and white thyroid pills because I have Hashimoto's disease, and my thyroid is dissolving itself, but it's not a big deal. My rheumatoid disease has been the real problem because the pain is almost a physical substance that prevents me from moving in the world the way I imagine I should be able to. My pill container is stocked, 4 rows of pills, 7 columns stacked with little plastic doors. Next to it, there's a square note on the dining room table I left for myself on the golden veneer surface that is a little rippled and scratched. An amazing find from the Habitat for Humanity store in town, 50 bucks, still proud of it. Replaced the very depressing $10 table I got from a junk place when we first moved up to Connecticut from Georgia, where my husband Cliff had been unemployed and my salary was low, and we'd had to borrow from everyone and take out a loan from my employer at my fancy new professor gig. My square reminder note on the table says charger, water, grading, because without reminders and packing lists, I'm too distracted to remember even the basic stuff. And I don't know whether it is early mental fading or exhaustion. I feel like multitasking and mothering and worrying have done something to my brain. I'm 48, and it's not so much that I can't think, but rather that my brain is tired, which is why this recreation was not written in a single draft, and which is why all credit to Carlo Knausgaard for claiming that 6 volumes of his autobiographical My Struggle, yes, which I read, all of them, which is maybe why I'm a little cranky about it, came out of him in a text orgasm without an edit. But my writing has to come out in crumbs and messes that I glue together slowly because I am too exhausted and fragmented to be coherent from the get-go, and that's okay. In fact, I think the collage and also the conversation with oneself is really what's in it for me. The sense of being accompanied, of getting to know and not hate myself. The sense that a block of text is smarter than I am because it's a series of snapshots of me over time with all the dead bits pared away like the eyes of potatoes you edge out with the tip of a knife. It's me plus caffeine with all the clarity highlighted. I'm taking your time with my real life bullshit, and there's no excuse for it. So I should either apologize or I should swing around my 6-volume book cock and assume my own brilliance. But there's no amount of coffee in the world that could get me to that level of confidence. So I'm going to assume I'm among friends. This day, November 19th, 2019, isn't the best day or the worst day or anything. It's just a day that sticks in my head because of the chemistry of adrenaline, downtime, and notes made in a journal. But I've always liked the idea of watching the mind in the container of a day, because really one of my favorite books ever is Nicholson Baker's novel, The Mezzanine. And it's not even a whole day. But what I love about it is that the narrator rides escalators and buys shoelaces. And I know there's a complex, beautiful structure inside it, but it's really about the mind of a person having an amazingly normal web of thoughts, like those symphonies going on inside all of us all the time, beautiful, invisible kaleidoscopes. And I always wanted to do that for real, to write that. All right, that's my first 5 pages.
That's so wonderful, Sonia. I love this. I mean, I've read it and I was reading it again last night. If you're reading it again, hearing you read it is even more fun. And it's funny because so many of my questions that I have are answered in there. But what I'm really interested in too is I love that you're really going after the day, how it actually works. And there's 2 big questions I have, and you can decide which one you want to answer first. Or I'll make up another answer for something really different that I didn't ask. Is why, I mean, though you kind of say why you chose this day, maybe just a little bit expanding on why you chose this day, and then how you reconstructed it. Like you talk about the notes and stuff. But as I know from reading it fully, there's flashbacks and things, and like, how it relates to the day itself, or how much the writing process itself becomes part of the memory of the day.
Awesome. That's great. Well, so I wanted to do this for a long time. Like I've been thinking about stream of consciousness writing for 10 years or so, or probably longer at this point. And but like most of our days are kind of like, we get up and brush our teeth and blah, 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 right? And I didn't start out this day in the morning knowing that I was going to write about it. I was just like, oh my God, I've got enough going on. But then after court, or actually, I think part of it is that I was very keyed up during the whole day, but then I had downtime. So I had a lot of time to kind of journal and sit on the train and sit on the subway, sit in court. And then after court, I went into a gift shop because I wanted to get my son just a little good luck charm for his driver's permit test. And I got this little glass egg, and it reminded me of a bunch of things. Like it just triggered a bunch of associations. It made me think of my own childhood and marbles that I used to collect. And something about like that, finding it and sort of having that object that was like a link between the morning and the afternoon. I was like, oh, this is a thing. Like I could write about this. And at first I thought, oh, maybe this egg is like part of an essay. And then I don't even know at what point, I don't think I even committed to writing the thing until like days later. And so then at that point I had to go back and like, and so then I started to try and reconstruct everything I could to make a timeline of the day. So it's interesting, right? With our smartphones, like how much we have quite a running electric commentary of our activities. So I saw when I opened Twitter, I saw what I retweeted, right? And then I remembered a lot of stuff. And so part of it was just journaling along sort of like a timeline graph, like what were the sensory triggers? There was a lot of like text correspondence with the people who were going to court. And then I started to, I was also, because I had grading with me and a journal, I just sort of I pulled all those documents together. And then eventually, I mean, that took like, I would say it took like a good couple of months to kind of figure out, okay, what was I thinking about my coffee? What was I thinking about my bagel, and kind of do the reconstruction. Yeah. So, and then I also had the notes from the training, and then I had a set of notes from the action itself, because both of them were so interesting and full of so many details that I had journaled about them after the fact. I didn't think that I was going to write about it, but I just wanted to remember it, like for myself. So yeah, so then, then the process really was, and I showed everything to a dear friend, Nalini Jones, who's a talented writer. And she, she was like, we got to think about the structure, because it was sort of like a blast of detail. And so then that was the hard part. The hard part was figuring out, in the chronology of the day, where do you break, right? And where should I put some context about the action, and where should I put the action itself? And so basically my decision there was to try and figure out how to give context in sort of little bubbles without breaking the momentum of the day too much. So it ended up being sort of like pieces along. I keep thinking of it as like a big stalk of Brussels sprouts. Do you know what I mean? With like all the little bubbles that come off of it on the side. So that's like that's my visual for the structure of the book.
And so how, that's beautiful. And I saw it because you had posted on Facebook your
Oh, that
and
diagram.
Instagram about your structure, you know, and how you whiteboard. You were so happy you could use your iPad as your whiteboard. So that's what made me think of that question about the structure. But also I'm wondering, because so you were structuring the context, but again, like the egg memory, for instance, that clearly brought you back to something and then forward. And I'm just curious, the other flashbacks in the book, because there's a lot of them,
Yeah,
and that aren't just context about the actions, which is
right,
also great to have, but they go way back, you know, and I'm
right.
just wondering, were those things, I guess, or was it a mix of things that were triggered in the day itself, or was some of it triggered by looking at the events of the day while you were compiling?
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's a really great question. Yeah, it was actually like, I don't think I had all of these thoughts during the course of the day. So it is really using the day and then sort of, I guess, you know, I feel like each book that I write is like a game with a certain set of rules. And so part of the rules for this game for myself were that I wanted to be as tangenty as I could. Like that was my, you know, like go wild with all the connections, right? And so, yeah, then I really did let myself see how far I could spin out from a sensory trigger and, you know, then because the book is about activism and I've been involved in activism for a long time, it ends up being sort of a, you know, kind of a reflection about, you know, different eras in my activist life too.
Yeah, no, which I loved. I mean, I love, there were just so many things it reflects on. And yeah, and so what I was thinking of when you were saying that is that wonderful quote from Borges about how a memory is a memory of the last time you had the memory.
Yeah.
But you're kind of adding writing into the mix. So my other question is about how writing itself, like, you know, it's like that physics thing, right? Where if you look at something, it actually can change its trajectory, or Margaret Mead, you know, looking at people changes their trajectory. So do you think trying to capture the thought, you know, do you think that then affects how it goes and how you respond to it?
Oh yeah. You mean like if I like in looking at the experience, does the whole story change because I'm looking at it,
Well,
right?
looking, and then looking partly is part A, and then B, taking yet another step in writing. And one of the things we did, which this might be a nice segue, is one of the exercises you did in the workshop that you taught about certain triggers. One of them was meditating.
Mhm.
But instead, you know, usually when people are meditating, they're attempting, which of course is literally impossible, but the attempt to not, quote, not think, which is,
Yeah.
in my opinion, a myth about meditation. But anyway, but you asked us to look at where the thoughts went, so the opposite, and then write them down, right? And so
Right.
that's like a 3-part process, and I'm wondering if that relates to what you were doing here in the book itself too.
Well, I think, you know, it's sort of interesting, right? Because it turns out that as I was writing, certain themes did keep coming up. And I mean, I think, right. So this within the constraints of the day, I knew everything that happened. So then there's the question of where's the discovery for the writer, right? And we know that, I mean, one thing I say in classes all the time is you know, if there's no surprise for the reader, there's no surprise for the reader. I forget who said that, but I bet you one of the smart people in our audience knows. And so the surprise and the discovery for me, and I think the sort of recomposing and shuffling my own memories around this day, and it did end up like sort of having this it sort of helped me in a way to integrate a lot of the activist narrative side of my story that I think for the longest time I didn't really talk about in the writing world. I have bits and pieces of it in, in pieces of my other books, but I'd spent an enormous amount of time, doing activism and not really, and I had a lot of feelings about it that I'd never written about, good and bad, and sort of like, and yet at the same time, I saw that work as sort of separate from writing or from family, right? And so this is the first time that I tried to figure out, is there a whole person, the narrator, who's actually just trying to stitch all this together? So that was weird for me, because I guess I've sort of compartmentalized the activism. And I don't know that I got to any conclusions, but I think it was a good conversation to have with myself. And I think, there's a line at one point in the book that I got to, and that I've been thinking about a lot since then. I write at one point, I'm both so angry and so afraid. And I've been trying to, that's sort of like a fundamental character thing, right? Maybe, or it's sort of like this, this balancing act that I'm just trying to understand what it means to live like that, right? And so that's something that I hadn't articulated before. I feel like because this book is so random and it's much more about me than other books I've written. I feel like in some ways it was more of a personal mirror than some of my other books, which are about various topics like Nazi Germany or healthcare. So I don't even know did I answer that question?
Oh yeah, no, beautifully. And in fact, it reminded me of the other question I almost forgot, which actually is really important for me, is that the question about, you're talking about what it did for you, and what do you hope, and I think it's really important, and it does have like this 360 thing, and I also do a lot of activism, and I understand that, there's like art over here and activism over there, and just, and there's all these priorities that, people have things and feelings about, and classism, and then you also have, relationship stuff in there too, on top of everything else, which all intersects, which is beautiful. But what do you think you want the reader to get out of it, if any? Like, is there something specific that you think might come of it for them? I mean, I have some thoughts about what came of it for me, but I'm just curious what your thoughts about that are.
I think, well, one thing that's really important to me is, like, I sort of I wanted to first encourage anybody who's reading it, and through all the classes that I'm doing too, to sort of see that it doesn't have to be a big day. Like, sort of anything you examine in a day itself is going to have all of these, like, the things that we call the mundane material, I think, are so rich. And as a side note, I forgot to mention that for folks who are interested, so after reading Stream of Consciousness, like Virginia Woolf and James Joyce Ulysses, and also the Mezzanine, which I mentioned, I participated in 2018 in this beautiful project called the What Happened Project. And it was started by Ander Monson, who's a professor, and he runs the Essay Daily website. And so hundreds of people all agreed to write an essay on, I think it was June 28th, 2018, or June 21st. We all knew in advance that we were going to write an essay about that day, right? And so I really did not think that anything like this whole book could be possible if it wasn't for that What Happened project. And so these are all online. I'll put in a bit, I'll put in the chat a worksheet that I drew up, and it's got links to that project. There's an ebook you can download of some selected. selections, and this actually happened twice, but it was so beautiful. And so, I mean, I think, I talk a lot about in classes about the idea of a creative constraint, right? And so the day as we're in it is the ultimate creative constraint, in that you have a very set form, right? Like, one of the things that's overwhelming about nonfiction is that the material is literally everything you've ever experienced, right? That's a lot of material. And so I love that this like hones it in a little bit. It's like a little sonnet, right? And so then you have to figure out, okay, what is here in this day? And so anyway, I wrote about like going to the doctor and taking my son to the grocery store. And so then I was, I sort of like feel like that project helped me to learn how to do this. And then, I just sort of took it into the next level. But anyway, so I wanted to share that. So I think that, that I just feel like there's so much more to be done with this, but I want to read this from other people, because every time I read this kind of writing, I feel like, oh, this is the melody of thinking, like my brain recognizes that another brain is working in that particularly odd melody that a brain works, right? The sort of spinning constantly.
So do you hope that the book itself will give people permission to do that? Is it like the Paul
Yeah.
Elford thing, great piece of art makes somebody want to make art? Is that what, you're trying to do in a sense, is like,
Yeah.
here's me doing this. Hopefully gives you permission to do this and feel and think this way. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think it does that. And I just, that's, because I feel like by giving yourself the space and permission to think, in the 360 degrees of your life, and actually, weirdly enough, well, you have a structure clearly that you need, but like there's well, the restraint is the day itself. There, on the other hand, there's all this freedom of allowing, like you said, all the tangents, probably helped by, that freedom of a discipline, right? The freedom of a constraint gives you then the ability to go off onto these things. And just one final question, then maybe, I don't know if there are questions people have, or if you want to do a prompt with people, but just thinking about it now is, when you were going through all the day, did you end up finding like that you had like too much material, and what was the reasoning? Was there anything you cut out? Was there anything, or did you find a place for everything you wanted? Just curious about that.
I threw everything in there. Like I threw everything. I think I'm trying to think of.
That's awesome.
God, that's a good. I mean, I'm just sort of feel like in some ways, like you could do this infinitely. You know what I mean? Like I sort of feel like how a number line, if you stretch it out, like there's infinite spaces between 0 and 1. I feel like you could just keep going, right? If you wanted to really free yourself up to tangent. Yeah, I'm sure there's stuff that I had in the beginning draft. I think, I mean, the book is partially also about anxiety. And if I had included every single anxious thought, like it'd be a phone book of just worry. And so I think partly I didn't want to inflict all of that on the reader, because that's just, you need a balance. And Carrie had said, please go ahead, folks in the audience, if you have questions or comments, you could feel free to throw it in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wondered whether if people don't have questions right away, I'm just thinking, given the fact you want to activate this in other people, we could maybe, if you wanted to give a prompt or something like you had been thinking about, like we did in the workshops. I'm just going to quickly say I invited, Sonia offered, and I invited her to my writing workshop. And she offered us a bunch of different prompts, which are kind of related to this book in terms of ways of thinking about a day, but in really kind of small chunks, because it was a small workshop. And I found it really, really wonderful. And I know everyone else that was there did. It was about the same size as I think the group here right now. So, if somebody doesn't have a question right away, I don't know, Carrie, if they do, I can't see them. No. So maybe
I
video-
could, yeah, I'll definitely like move into the prompts. I
Yeah.
wanted to say one other thing that I
Oh, yeah,
thought
and I
of.
have one more question too, but yeah,
Oh,
you go first.
okay,
You go
cool.
first. Yeah, yeah, just remember.
I think, part of, I think the other thing that that I really did want to explore in the book, I think is some is that I think sometimes, I mean, I hope this is changing. I think it probably is, right? Like at one point, I think, in the 80s or 90s, like most people I know who weren't activists were definitely not activists. Like people feel like they can't call themselves that unless they're like dropping a Greenpeace banner from like a smokestack. Do you know what I mean? And so like part of what I wanted to do, and then I saw a tweet a couple of years ago that really I found weirdly comforting, and it said, every organizer I know has an anxiety disorder. And I say that because and I share so much about how being active feels, because I'm always interested in every possible venue and topic to lower the bar. Like yeah, I'm just really interested in talking more about what it's like to meld being an engaged citizen with the other crap in our lives. And that if you're an engaged citizen, it doesn't mean that you're not annoyed when you're doing it, that you're not late, that you're not complaining in your head. Like I'm just interested in having those worlds come together somehow and normalizing it. I don't, yeah, that's just something I really haven't thought of until just now. So that's, I think, another thing that was important for me in the book.
Yeah, no, and as somebody, we haven't talked about this together, but as somebody who was highly active at a time when no one was, AKA the 80s and 90s, it was deeply uncool.
Right,
like
right.
because of Reagan, I'm older than you, so I was 17 when he got elected, and it was just horrifying, and to see that kind of disengagement. And then it took me a long time to figure out how to move my art and that together, and I'm still working on that. It's an endless project, but I realized it was because it's about a level of awareness and perception. Like I honestly believe, and I could be delusional, but like I think that like what you're doing and this idea of looking at a day or looking at one's actions, like it's almost, for lack of a better word, an ethical way of being. Like it sounds a little bit moralistic maybe, but I don't mean it that way. I just mean, if you're paying attention on that level, how can you then not pay attention to the other stuff? And I think now of like the beauty of somebody like Greta Thunberg or whatever, who's like 16 and it's just like, well, hell no. And she just sits there and it's like, I'm going to just sit here.
Right.
And then that inspires this whole new thing. Like there's it feels like there's a generational shift back to this sense that activism not only is not an accessory item, but it's something that's actually imperative. And for those kids, frankly, it is.
Right, right. And also that it's just like that there's no idea about doing it perfect and it's not heroic. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like I just would love it to be seen by more people as like, it's just an everyday thing, right? And
Yeah.
so it's not, and I think I tried to like, kind of make fun of myself as much as possible.
Sure.
And like, to not make it seem like I'm making too big of a deal out of it, to humanize it.
Yeah, no, I think that's important too, that it's just an integrated part. Like that's kind of when I was texting, I did a lot of texting work with Move On during the last presidential election. And, just that kind of just making it a daily practice. It was like, I meditate, I do yoga, I send texts, it's sort of like whatever you can do, like, cause I can't get out there physically right now because of a lot of things. So it's just
Right.
like also finding that place you can go that works for you with whatever disabilities and whatever issues, yeah, it's real. So
Yeah.
yeah. Mm. Okay, well, I feel like I don't know.
Here's a
somebody
question from
wrote
Lynn.
else. Good.
Okay, so Lynn, who's my friend I knew in Georgia. Hi, Lynn. She writes, you've written wonderfully about your illness and pain. I'm sure that's a factor in this book too, but how do you think it's shaped your writing in general? Ooh, I love that question. Thank you so much. Well, and actually, like, this was one of the first things that I thought I was going to write about this topic was about disability. And because at the action itself, so and I sort of do write about disability all through the book. I get really proud of myself because I remember to wear a wrist splint, and that protects my wrist and it makes it much easier to get handcuffed. It was interesting to me that all of the effort to go and sit in Times Square and go to jail for 10 hours was less hard on my body than going to a march in DC. And so after the Extinction Rebellion, like there were this huge, range of actions that XR and a bunch of other groups did when Greta Thunberg was in New York in 2019. And then there was a lot of people sort of saying like, oh, well, XR is ridiculous because their protests aren't accessible to the disabled. And that's both true, but also not true. I mean, like, I'm disabled. It was actually easier for my body. Another woman in my arrest group, did not have two hands. And so, and at the same time, right, we think of like other activist groups. Like I think of, oh my God, why am I not thinking of their name? This disability rights group that has been so urgently attentive to healthcare issues in particular, and have gotten arrested at all the protests at the Capitol over the past 4 years when the Affordable Care Act was threatened, right? And so I think there's a difference between saying every action has to be universally accessible to everyone versus can we have a range of options so that a range of bodies can participate in different ways. So anyway, I was really tempted to get into it on Twitter, which, if you're really tempted to get into it on Twitter with strangers, like you got to walk yourself back. And I think I actually had posted a tweet, and then my dear friend Elizabeth Hiltz, who's here, was like, Sonia, do you need to tweet that? And then, but anyway, that was my first engagement, was thinking like, what was this like for my body? But the question of like, and I'll tell you, when I first got rheumatoid arthritis when I was 39, I did not think that in my future would be that I would ever be able to get arrested in a major action, and so I think the option to do that comes about because of the shift in perspective that pain has given me. Like for me, it's just all about the windows, right? Like, when can I do this one thing? When can I do this thing? And it's like a jigsaw puzzle, as opposed to like demanding that I'm always at full capacity. So I think somehow being really attentive to my body from minute to minute somehow also was part of the foundation of thinking about observing the day with that same level of sort of like minute attention. If that's a great question, because it feels very related, but I don't know if I've expressed it well enough. But anyway, that's a great question.
I'm just going to come in with a related question, because I think it really is a great question. Thanks, Lynn. Is back to my original one, and I sort of sideswipe, it didn't really get to, but I think relates to this, about how language can capture experience, right? Mm-hmm. So pain is such an internal thing, right? And we can't see it. It's you know, the invisible disabilities, right? The ones you can't actually see, whether it's emotional or physical pain, and how, you know, just your experience, if you want to talk, because you talk about a lot of like sensory triggers and things like that, and that's definitely one way to get to it. But you know, how, and also the show tell thing, which I know you wrote an essay about, you know, about how sometimes you actually have to tell
Yeah.
because dude, it's not the same for you, you know, like in other words, like there's this kind of assumption that there's this baseline experience. So if you talk about actions, everybody's going to understand the emotions and they might not. So just how, you know, how you deal with that language experience thing.
The language experience. Do you mean like what choices I made in actually putting it on the page, or?
Well, yeah, or just any, or do you, all right, let me just put it, like, do you ever have any frustrations with, or what, how do you, like, do you ever have any experiences that you find it hard to articulate in language itself? And then what do you do when that happens? Let me just put it in a
Oh
very,
yeah. So I will say like that I feel like even as a nonfiction writer, so much of my lived experience doesn't make it into the an essay because it doesn't rise to the level of like essay topic worthy material. And I include in that the sort of like thrum of anxiety, you know what I mean? Just like my baseline. And then my baseline of like stuff I try to do in the world because I, you know, for whatever community or, you know, ethical values that I have, right? Like those are things that I don't feel often like commenting on. And so I like the chance that I got to do it here. And yeah, I sort of think I'm interested in the form of the essay because essays have topics. Do you know what I mean? And I think too, and this is something I'm talking about in the writing groups about writing the mundane with this book, is that when we're focusing on a topic that seems really important to us, maybe it's because we don't want to look at all this stuff over here, or maybe this is the hard stuff. And so this was a really good exercise for me in terms of like, what have I chosen over and over again with a bunch of essays and books to not look at? And so this is sort of like, as much as I can, challenging my own, I guess, just denial about what are the actual substance of my days.
yeah. And I just want to add quickly, because we haven't talked about it. I loved the second half about your son's driving lesson, I mean driving test as well. I just want to, just because we haven't talked about that part, and I love that you put them both there because they're equally important, right? I mean, to me they seem like, well, they're, you know, they're both a huge part of the texture of life, right? It's not just there's a whole day of activism, drama, you know,
Right.
there's just personal stuff, and activism's over here. You've actually like managed, like, even though I know it was partly you and your calendar issues, but it created a beautiful substance where that becomes just as important, you know. And I think that's cool because usually, you know, in every popular representation of this, it's always one or the other thing,
Right.
you know. It's like there's the guy that's off doing his thing and the wife saying, why aren't you at home? Or the woman going, or whatever, you know. And like to actually put them together is a wonderful sort of subversive way of undermining that narrative, that
divide.
narrative.
Yeah. I'm gonna since I haven't gotten a chance to talk about writing techniques, I'm gonna drop into the chat the worksheet that I've been using for to running writing classes about to accompany this book. And so what I'm doing, and I did with Julia's writing group, is that I just come in and I'll do writing prompts, and it's free and I love doing it. It's really fun. And so please email me. My email address is on the worksheet, and I'm just love to schedule these things. So
they're wonderful.
Yeah. And so, yeah, what you'll see on the worksheet is a list of a bunch of books that are about a single day or stream of consciousness. And actually, I've got another reading list coming out in LitHub next week. That's all books about a day. But the prompts are a lot about sort of taking the model from the What Happened project. So I ask folks to write about sensory triggers or concrete details that have clung to your consciousness so far in this day, right? And so it's always interesting that people find such beautiful images, and that I think, we often don't think of the day we're in right now as having any good material, right? Usually it's like, oh, this significant thing, that significant thing. But people come up with some astounding stuff. And then I have folks, focus on one object and tell the story of that object, just something they've handled today in their house. And then I have folks sit quietly for 2 minutes and watch their thoughts, and then take 5 minutes and write down everything about where their mind went. And it's just, there's been something very grounding about hearing people talk about the day that we're all in together. It's been very nice. So yeah, I'm happy to do that again and again if any of y'all would like me to.
And it just reminded me, I can't believe we forgot this, the wonderful feminist trope from the 70s, which is the personal is political.
Right.
Joy.
Oh my God.
Like, and of course that's exactly what this is about, I know it's so funny, and it really is, as it turns out, and just looking at these experiences and taking the time. And there's that wonderful thing John Cage said too, which, talk about somebody who really was a good, guy who got people to sit down and listen for 4 minutes and 33 seconds while they were waiting for a piano. And they were angry, by the way, in the 50s. They were not happy about that. They were like, he was run out of Woodstock. But he used to say, like, if you're doing the dishes, and you're bored, he's like, if you really pay attention, like if you really just turn into the thing you're doing, as you want to just turn away and think about a million things or put on the radio, but just actually focus, it can become beautiful. And I actually think that's true. And I think that kind of the exercises in your workshop and the book you do, the writing, your own writing, really show that it's kind of over and over. And one has to believe if people are holding moments sacred, that maybe they can hold bigger things sacred too.
Yeah, it does seem like to be a very sort of magic way to stop time momentarily, and to to catch things as they're as they're in danger of dissolving. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Does anybody else, other folks have any questions or anything you want to say before we close?
You have about 5 minutes. If anyone wants to ask Sonia. That sounds like
what else could I say?
Carrie, do you want to ask Sonia? Carrie's coming back.
Do you want to pop that worksheet in the chat? Did you do that?
Yeah, I just
did. Yeah.
Oh, you do? Oh,
did it show up?
I don't see it on my.
It's there. Oh no, you sent it just to us, Sonia. You didn't send it to everybody. You just
right. Host and panelists.
Oh, host and panelists.
Right.
Yes, you need to send it to everybody, I think.
Sorry, everybody.
And I'm just curious too, just how has, of course I have to ask a pandemic question, right? How has isolation and COVID, so this idea of time contained in a single day, but how has isolation and COVID sort of morphed or shifted your perception of time, of a day, has it changed how you relate to very finite moments?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and because this happened, and then I started writing the thing, and then I got COVID. And so then I was sick for like 6 months. And so right, like long COVID, even unlike RA, like the constraint is very small, and Julia knows because she also experienced it. And I'm really happy that I had the anchor of this book when long COVID came, because I did a lot of journaling while I was sick, but I also did a lot of just like, I had this list of every day, and then things that happened, even if it was like saw a woodpecker, or like what was for dinner, because I just felt like I was in danger of like slipping backward, or like not having any details or anything to hold me like to the present. So yeah, so it I guess like long COVID was very much an intensive, and especially, well, and all of us have lived through, especially the scary beginning of the pandemic, when suddenly we couldn't do anything, right, except see each other virtually. And so, right, I think that was sort of like a global kind of like, okay, we have to turn inward and look at just what's around us, because this is now our world, right? Yeah, so it's a weirdly pandemic-y book in a way.
Weirdly pandemic-y. We'll leave it at that. So if there is no last questions, I think we'll finish up. I am gonna pop the link to the book. If you'd like to, again, purchase a copy of Sonia's book, which comes out Saturday. It's a signed copy. You can pick it up at the Westport Library, or we'll ship it to you. The link is in the chats. Thank you both so much. This was such an interesting conversation, and just inspirational, and just got the wheels turning. And I hope to invite you back, both back, if you're willing to make the trip, Julia, down to when we open back up again. I would love to.
Absolutely. You're not that far. I'm in New York City. I mean, I can get there. Trains exist. I did live in Connecticut for a time. They might let me in.
So thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Sonia.
And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening, and we'll see you back at another event soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.